The hidden sins of Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham had left his father's house on God's command and had left with nephew Lot. Abram and Lot were forced to split up, one going one way and the other the other. One might expect Abram, the recipient of God's promise, to exercise his right and choose first, but he graciously gave Lot the first choice. Lot made his decision based solely on human considerations, contenting himself with the fat of the land. Abram's decision to let Lot choose first was undoubtedly a faith-based decision, with Abram focusing on things spiritual, that is, God's promise, rather than things temporal. Lot's decision was completely selfish, and he left Abram and went to Sodom. Lot looked up and saw the entire Jordan Valley plain. This valley was lush and fruitful, well-watered, and resembled the Lord's garden. Lot pitched his tent near Sodom, where the men were wicked, greatly sinning before the Lord. Later in chapter 19, their wickedness is revealed. Lot is contrasted with Abram. Abram was instructed to raise his eyes and look, which Lot did on his own. 3 men visited Abraham near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron. Now the Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, while he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. When he raised his eyes and looked, behold, 3 men were standing opposite him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed down to the ground and said, "My Lord, if now I have found favor in your sight, please do not pass your servant by. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet, and make yourselves comfortable under the tree, and I will bring a piece of bread, so that you may refresh yourselves. After that you may go on, since you have visited your servant." And they said, "So do as you have said." So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, "Quickly, prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make bread cakes." Abraham also ran to the herd and took a tender and choice calf and gave it to the servant, and he hurried to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf, which he had prepared, and set it before them, and he was standing by them under the tree as they ate. Then they said to him, "Where is your wife Sarah?" And he said, "There, in the tent." He said, "I will certainly return to you at this time next year, and behold, your wife Sarah will have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. Sarah was past childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I have become old, am I to have pleasure, my Lord being old also?" But the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, 'Shall I actually give birth to a child when I am so old? Is anything too difficult for the Lord?' At the appointed time I will return to you, at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Sarah denied it, however, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. And he said, "No, but you did laugh." Then the men rose up from there and looked down toward Sodom, and Abraham was walking with them to send them off. The Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Since Abraham will certainly become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed. For I have chosen him, so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him." And the Lord said, "The outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down now and see whether they have done entirely as the outcry, which has come to me, indicates, and if not, I will know." Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, while Abraham was still standing before the Lord. Abraham approached and said, "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous people within the city. Will you indeed sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked are treated alike. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly?" So the Lord said, "If I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare the entire place on their account." And Abraham replied, "Now behold, I have ventured to speak to the Lord, although I am only dust and ashes. Suppose that 50 righteous are lacking 5. Will you destroy the entire city because of 5? And he said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. And he spoke to him yet again and said, Suppose 40 are found there. And he said, I will not do it on account of the 40. Then he said, Oh, may the Lord not be angry, and I shall speak. Suppose 30 are found there. And he said, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And he said, Now behold, I have ventured to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. And he said, I will not destroy it on account of the 20. Then he said, Oh, may the Lord not be angry, and I shall speak only this once. Suppose 10 are found there. And he said, I will not destroy it on account of the 10. As soon as he had finished speaking to Abraham, the Lord departed, and Abraham returned to his place. The intercession of Abraham for the people of Sodom. The central theme of this story is justice. It develops from the preceding verses. God is certainly capable of doing whatever he desires, but will it be just? The answer is obvious, as evidenced by his responses to Abraham's appeals. Interestingly, God had a dual motivation for revealing his plan. All nations would be blessed through Abraham. So God told him that one city, Sodom, would be removed before it could be blessed through him. Second, Abraham was to teach his descendants righteousness and justice, what is right and just, in order for them to benefit from God's blessings. If those people's sins were complete, they would be judged. Will God sweep the righteous along with the unrighteous? Abraham was convinced that there were righteous people in Sodom. So he appealed to Sodom based on God's justice. His intercession reveals Abraham's great character. He prayed that everyone in the cities, both the wicked and the righteous, be spared for the sake of the righteous. Previously, he had personally rescued these people during a battle. He now pleaded for them with the same boldness, perseverance, and generosity that he had fought for them. Some readers are perplexed by Abraham's bargaining with God. But despite their audacity, Abraham's prayers were delivered with genuine humility and profound reverence. He pleaded for justice, deliverance for Sodom if only 50, 45, 40, 30, 20, or even 10 righteous people were present. He was not attempting to persuade God to do something against his will. Lot's prayer for Zoar, on the other hand, was quite the opposite. As a result, the theme of justice dominates those who will benefit from God's blessing. These truths should have concerned Israel as much as they did Abraham, who turned them into compassionate intercession. God in his holy righteousness scream out against Sodom and Gomorrah. Onlooking celestial beings cried out against Sodom and Gomorrah. The mass of sufferers of Sodom and Gomorrah's sin cried out against those metropolises. Effective prayer involved understanding who God is and how God operates in a given situation. Effective prayer is not a passive observer of what God does. Instead, it takes an active role and serves as a reminder to God through prayer. Abraham's concern for the people of Sodom and Gomorrah is quite remarkable. He could have simply prayed for his nephew Lot's safety, but he didn't. Instead, Abraham's heart was filled with sorrow and compassion, even for the wicked inhabitants of these cities. Abraham's persistence and intercession is truly remarkable and impossible to ignore. This is the kind of heart that God wanted to draw out of Abraham, a heart that cared deeply for people who were created in the image of God. Abraham worked tirelessly to intercede on behalf of a city that deserved judgment. This kind of heart is what a great leader of a large and mighty nation needs to have. After leaving Abraham, the two visitors mentioned in Genesis chapter 18, verse 22 arrived in Sodom. It is at this point that they are first identified as angelic beings, who had previously accompanied the Lord during his visit to Abraham at Mamre. Genesis chapter 19, verses 1 through 3. Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, as Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he stood up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. And he said, Now behold, my lords, please turn aside into your servant's house and spend the night, and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way. They said, No, we shall spend the night in the public square. Yet he strongly urged them, so they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. We have no reason to believe that Lot knew the nature of these guests. To him, They probably seemed like distinguished guests with an air of righteousness and morality about them. We see that Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. Lot's life was a gradual decline as he kept compromising. He went from looking towards Sodom, Genesis chapter 13, verse 10, to pitching his tent towards Sodom, Genesis chapter 13, verse 12, to eventually living in Sodom, Genesis chapter 14, verse 12. Unfortunately, he lost everything when Sodom was attacked. Now, after returning to the infamous city, Lot was seen sitting in the gate of Sodom, which indicate that he had become a civic leader. The gate area of an ancient city was like a community center where the city's respected leaders would come together. They would settle arguments, talk over important matters, and keep an eye on everyone coming in or going out of the city. Lot was a good and moral man who felt deeply troubled by the wrongdoing he saw all around him. 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 7 through 8. And if he rescued righteous Lot, who was tormented by the immoral conduct of unprincipled and ungodly men, for that just man, while living among them, felt his righteous soul tormented day after day by what he saw and heard of their lawless acts. Peter has already shared with us the story of how God saved Noah. Now, he tells us about another person God saved, righteous Lot. When we look at Lot's story, we can see that God is just as capable of saving people as he is of punishing them. This teaches us that God's kindness is just as strong as his sense of justice. He saved Lot because Lot was a good man in his eyes, even though others might not have recognized Lot's goodness. Despite being a good person, Lot lived in Sodom and Gomorrah, places filled with evil, and this troubled him deeply every day. He was disturbed by the sin around him, yet he didn't take strong enough steps to remove himself and his family from that bad environment. This shows us that it's not enough to be upset by wrongdoing. We must also take action to avoid being part of it. Lot made a big mistake that had serious consequences. He compromised his beliefs, and as a result, he lost the respect of his family and friends. They saw his actions and decided they couldn't trust him or his beliefs. This is why none of them were saved. It's a powerful lesson about the importance of staying true to what you believe in, no matter what. We also read something great about his insistence to help the angels. Lot was very insistent when he invited the visitors into his home. Usually it was common to offer hospitality to guests, but the way Lot did it was different. He was extremely eager and urgent in his invitation. This shows us that sometimes the way we do something can be just as important as what we are doing. Genesis chapter 19, verses 4 through 5. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter. And they called to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may have relations with them." The people of Sodom had no respect or consideration for their two guests. They ignored every rule of kindness and decency, driven by their own cruel and wrongful desires. We read, "The men of the city, both old and young, all the people from every quarter, surrounded the house." This demonstrates that the whole city was engulfed in violence and immorality. It wasn't something out of the ordinary. Rather, it was a common practice among the men of Sodom. Later on in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 16, God expressed strong disapproval of Judah's significant wrongdoing during the later years of the divided kingdom. He likened Jerusalem to the old city of Sodom, calling them akin to sisters. God then drew a parallel between the wrongdoings of Sodom and the sins being committed in Jerusalem during that era. "Behold, this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters, outlying cities, had arrogance, abundant food, and careless ease. But she did not help the poor and needy. They were haughty and committed repulsive acts before me. Therefore, I removed them when I saw it." Ezekiel chapter 16, verses 49 through 50. The message we get from the Ezekiel passage isn't just listing the sins of Sodom, like being proud, lazy, or unfair to the poor, as the only reasons they face judgment. These were sins that Sodom had, but Jerusalem, another city, was guilty of them too. When we look at Genesis, it's clear that God was upset about more than just those sins. He was also deeply troubled by the terrible acts of sexual violence and immorality happening in Sodom. This phrase, committed abomination, in Ezekiel, likely includes these sins too. So, the lesson here is about recognizing and turning away from all kinds of wrongs, not just a few. We read, that we may know them carnally. The sin of the men of Sodom was plainly connected to this. Lot bargains for the life and safety of his guests. Genesis chapter 19, verses 6 through 9. But Lot went out to them at the doorway and shut the door behind him and said, "Please, my brothers, do not act wickedly. Now look, I have 2 daughters who have not had relations with any man. Please let me bring them out to you and do to them whatever you like. Only do not do anything to these men, because they have come under the shelter of my roof." But they said, "Get out of the way." They also said, "This one came in as a foreigner, and already he is acting like a judge. Now he will treat you worse than them." So they pressed hard against Lot and moved forward to break the door. We read, "Please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly." Lot faced a tough challenge in getting his point across. He believed in a different sense of right and wrong compared to the men of Sodom. These men were chasing after what they thought was fun, paying no mind to Lot's warnings that their actions were wrong. This brings us to a crucial question. Without the Bible's direction on what is morally right and wrong in terms of our sexuality, what rules would we live by? It's clear that just following on our own desires isn't just a good enough standard. We read, "I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please, let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you wish." Lot's decision to offer his daughters to the crowd was appalling and indefensible. The behavior of the Sodomites was a horrifying display of moral decay, yet we find ourselves equally horrified by Lot's readiness to sacrifice his own daughters to satisfy the crowd. This appalling willingness mirrors the crowd's own reprehensible desires. To grasp the full gravity of this narrative, it's crucial to recognize the societal context of those times. Women were undervalued in the pre-Christian era, not afforded the respect and dignity they deserved. Conversely, the value placed on a guest's safety was extraordinarily high. Within this cultural framework, the protection of a guest was often prioritized above the well-being of one's own family members, reflecting a distorted understanding of hospitality and duty. This one came in to stay here, and he keeps acting like a judge. The men of Sodom mocked Lot and rejected his feeble efforts to provide moral and spiritual leadership. Perhaps Lot thought that, through compromise, he might have reached these men, but the opposite happened. They had no respect for him whatsoever, even though his friendly first approach led him to call such wicked men my brethren. Genesis chapter 19, verses 10 through 11. But the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them, and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, from the small to the great, so that they became weary of trying to find the doorway. It must have taken significant, perhaps supernatural strength to do what the angels did at the door. Probably for the first time, Lot understood that his guests were more than men. The work of striking the blind men was supernatural. Now, the mob's physical blindness matched its moral blindness. The angel's deliverance of Lot. Genesis chapter 19, verses 12 through 14. Then the 2 men said to Lot, "Whom else do you have here? A son-in-law and your sons and daughters, and whomever you have in the city, bring them out of the place, for we are about to destroy this place, because their outcry has become so great before the Lord, that the Lord has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, and said, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is destroying the city." But he appeared to his sons-in-law to be joking. The angels did not know everything. They did not know who all were in Lot's family until Lot told them. This shows us that even heavenly beings don't have all the knowledge. When the angels asked, "Do you have anyone else here?" it was a reminder that we should care about the salvation of not only ourselves, but also our entire family. Lot had daughters who were engaged to be married, but were not yet married. When it was said, "We will destroy this place. The Lord has sent us to destroy it," Lot found out for the first time what the angel's mission was: to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Even though these cities were to be judged, God's intention was to save Lot and his family from the destruction. We read, he seemed to be joking. Let's understand the significant impact of Lot's life choices. Picture this. When Lot tried to warn his sons-in-law about God's impending judgment with deep concern and seriousness, they simply did not take him seriously. They just couldn't believe him. This belief meant that they, too, would face God's judgment without any escape. From Lot's life, we learn a crucial lesson. You can be saved and still lead a life that amounts to nothing of value. Yes, Lot was saved, but what did he achieve? Nothing noteworthy or lasting. His life is a stark reminder that just being saved isn't enough. What we do with our lives also profoundly matters. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 15. But if any person's work is burned up by the test, he will suffer the loss of his reward. Yet he himself will be saved, but only as one who has barely escaped through fire. The angels try to hurry Lot and his family. Genesis chapter 19, verses 15 through 16. When morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city." But he hesitated. So the men grasped his hand, and the hand of his wife, and the hands of his 2 daughters, because the compassion of the Lord was upon him. And they brought him out and put him outside the city. There was now no mention of the 2 sons-in-law. They are going to be left behind because the angels are telling Lot he needs to hurry up and get out of Sodom before it's too late. Think about how these angels are acting kind of like messengers who spread the good news or a warning. Here's what they did. They told them clearly and straightforwardly that a terrible disaster was coming. They didn't just tell him once. They kept on urging him to escape and save himself. Now, there's a part where it says Lot hesitated. Even though he knew how bad Sodom was, he still didn't rush to leave. This hesitation shows us something important. When we don't feel the need to listen to God immediately, especially when we know it's for our own good, it shows we might be too comfortable with things we should actually avoid. This kind of delay is a warning sign that we might be moving away from what's right and getting too used to what's wrong. The angels literally had to drag Lot out of the city early in the morning. Of course, the Lord was being merciful by sparing Lot for Abraham's sake. Lot, however, squeezed a concession from the angels even after he was delivered. He wished to visit the small town of Zoar, which means a small one. This scene, however, would always remind Israel of Lot, lingering and halting as he was dragged to safety. Why do some of God's people join the corrupt world rather than flee a society doomed to destruction? In Genesis chapter 18, we read about a significant conversation between Abraham and God. Abraham steps forward and pleads with God to save the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah if just 10 good people could be found there. Unfortunately, these cities were so corrupt that not even 10 righteous souls could be found. Despite this, God listened to the core of Abraham's request. He showed mercy by rescuing Lot and his family from the destruction of Sodom. This act of salvation was so forceful that it seemed almost against Lot's own desire to leave. Now, let's consider Lot's situation. He found himself in a truly dire predicament. He was too attached to worldly pleasures to find joy in his relationship with the Lord. Yet he was too connected to the Lord to find genuine happiness in his worldly life. This story teaches us a vital lesson about where we find our contentment and how we must strive to balance our spiritual commitments with our earthly lives. Genesis chapter 19, verses 17 through 22. When they had brought them outside, one said, "Escape for your life. Do not look behind you, and do not stay anywhere in the surrounding area. Escape to the mountains, or you will be swept away." But Lot said to them, "Oh, no, my lords. Now behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have magnified your compassion, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, for the disaster will overtake me and I will die. Now behold, this town is near enough to flee to, and it is small. Please, let me escape there. Is it not small, so that my life may be saved?" And he said to him, "Behold, I grant you this request also, not to overthrow the town of which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there." Therefore the town was named Zoar. The angels were much more eager to save Lot and his family than Lot and his family were to be saved. This might seem odd, but it's often the case with spiritual matters. When Lot says, Please know, my lords, it shows us that he appears weak and almost whining in his plea, especially when we compare it to Abraham's strong and confident prayers in Genesis 18. We then learn, I cannot do anything until you arrive there. The statement addresses Abraham's question, will not the judge of all the earth do what is just? Genesis chapter 18, verse 25. Far be it from you to do such a thing, to strike the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked are treated alike. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right, by executing just and righteous judgment? God, committed to his principles of righteousness and integrity, was unable to pass judgment on the city of Sodom until he ensured that the righteous individuals there were saved. As a result, the city came to be known as Zoar, a name that translates to small or insignificant. That was the very city that Lot discussed and negotiated over with the angel. Genesis chapter 19, verses 23 through 26. The sun had risen over the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the surrounding area, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife from behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. As the angel mentioned in Genesis chapter 19, verse 22, God's judgment couldn't start on Sodom and Gomorrah until Lot and his family had reached the safety of Zoar. This was necessary to keep God's promise to Abraham intact. Once Lot and his family were safe, then the Lord sent down fire and sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah. These cities faced total and harsh judgment, but only after God had fully seen their sins and acknowledged that Lot was there as a good man among them. Before all this happened, the land of Sodom was incredibly lush and fertile, much like the Garden of Eden. Genesis chapter 13, verse 10. So Lot looked and saw that the valley of the Jordan was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. It was all like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go to Zoar, at the south end of the Dead Sea. Despite receiving incredible blessings and witnessing amazing acts of kindness from God, the people of Sodom and Gomorrah still turned their backs on him. They experienced God's power, grace, and mercy firsthand, more so than any others in their area. Through Abraham, God saved them from disaster. They heard Melchizedek talk about God and saw how both Melchizedek and Abraham lived their lives, clearly showing God's love and care. Yet, they chose to ignore all of this. Remember what happened to Lot's wife. She became a pillar of salt because she disobeyed the angel's clear warning not to look back. Genesis chapter 19, verse 17. This story teaches us an important lesson. We should focus on the future and our salvation, not dwell on a world that's fading away and facing God's judgment. This is the woman that Jesus referenced in Luke. Remember Lot's wife. Luke chapter 17, verse 32. Lot's wife is an unnamed woman mentioned in the Bible very few times. She is a woman that met an untimely end due to her disobedience of the word of the Lord. The truth is, we know more about the story surrounding the death of Lot's wife than anything else about her. Interestingly, the name of Lot's wife is not provided in the Bible, even though her existence contains numerous life lessons. We are not told why she turned back to gaze at the city while it was being destroyed. Lot's wife had every opportunity to live. Although Lot's wife is not named, we can make certain assumptions about her. She was familiar with the God whom Lot served, and she had Abraham as an uncle and might have learned a lot from him. She could have been present when her husband was kidnapped and saved by God's strength. She was exceedingly blessed to have God's angels in her home. They even took her by the hand and led her out of Sodom. But what good did it all do her in the end? All of God's grace was wasted on her. There are several key takeaways here. Number one, it is possible to be lost forever. Even though you are religious and have every opportunity to do right, you can come from a pleasing family, have many spiritual advantages, and still be lost. Number two, you can leave the world and begin on the correct path, but you will be eternally lost if you turn back. You are in charge of your own beliefs. But why did God care if she glanced over her shoulder at Sodom? Number 1. Looking back was an indication of doubt. She had to confess to God the penalty and fate of Sodom. He had spoken, and he would carry out his promise. We may declare that we believe God, yet when the test comes, we waver and look back. God invites us to put our trust in him and turn our attention to spiritual matters. Number 2, looking back was disobedience because God had clearly instructed not to look back. Go to the mountains and don't come back. There was no time allotted to hear all of her excuses or reasons for disobeying. That is why we struggle with the lessons of Uzzah, Ananias, and Sapphira. They expose justice for what it is and reveal God's stance on disobedience. Number 3, to look back may have revealed her true attachment to Sodom. Was she displaying a love for what she was leaving behind? Her body was leaving, but her heart was still in Sodom. Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. James chapter 4, verse 4. Do we want to be friends with the rest of the world? This does not imply giving up everything in the world. This world represents everything that is opposed to God, the wickedness that was once part of your life. Lot's wife's punishment was terrible, abrupt, and irreversible. She was denied another chance to flee when she looked back. All mercy that had previously been extended was abruptly withdrawn. The Bible does not go into detail about what happens, and it is exposed as a natural result of her decision. There will come a time when all of your opportunities to obey God will be gone. Some individuals scoff at preaching and teaching that refers to hell or any impending judgment. They perceive it as a scare tactic, intended to frighten children and fools. We are too wise to believe it. More than any other subject, Jesus spoke about hell. His words inspired the images of gnashing teeth and unquenchable fire. Consider the innumerable examples of people who had the opportunity to do the right thing and then lost that opportunity forever. Pharaoh, Nadab, and Abihu, Korah and his gang, Judas Iscariot, and so on. To warn people about hell would be to fail to convey the entire truth, making us culpable in God's judgment of sinners. God appointed the prophet Ezekiel to be a watchman over his people. God provided him with a detailed work description. Lot's wife's lessons are still relevant. God is still ready to condemn all men, and his word is still to not look back. Will you flee God's vengeance in Jesus' blood? Let God's angels take you out of the city to safety. Genesis chapter 19, verses 27 through 29. Now Abraham got up early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the surrounding area. And behold, he saw the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of a furnace. So it came about, when God destroyed the cities of the surrounding area, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the destruction. When he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived, Abraham felt the strong connection to the events of the previous day. He wanted to hold on to the memory of his encounter with God. As he looked at the smoke rising from the destroyed cities, Abraham understood that God had listened to his plea. Before the cities were destroyed, God saved Lot. Now, think about how a believer should feel when they witness God's judgment on the wrongdoers. Here's how they should react. They must accept God's decisions with humility. They must feel truly thankful that they were saved. They must be more careful about how they live their own lives. They must recognize how terrible sin is and avoid it. In the great destruction, the Lord overthrew the wicked cities in the entire plain with burning sulfur. Some believe that sulfur deposits erupted from the earth and then fell from the heavens in flames of fire. Lot's wife returned her gaze intently and was transformed into a pillar of salt, a memorial to her disobedience. The burning sulfur was responsible for the dense smoke Abraham saw. Though God judged the sinners in the plain cities, he also remembered Abraham, that is, God remembered Lot's request and saved Lot from the disaster. Lot is debased. Genesis chapter 19, verses 30 through 32. Now Lot went up from Zoar with his 2 daughters and stayed in the mountains, because he was afraid to stay in Zoar, and he stayed in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, "Our father is too old, and there is not a man on earth to have relations with us according to the custom of all the earth. Come, let's make our father drink wine, and let's sleep with him so that we may keep our family alive through our father." Lot and his daughters were not happy in Zoar for reasons we don't understand, and it seems the people of Zoar were not happy with them either. So they decided to leave Zoar and move to the mountains, where they lived in a cave. Despite losing everything when Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, Lot and his family soon had wine. They either took the wine with them from their previous home or they found it in Zoar. We read, "We will lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father." So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and slept with her father. And he did not know when she lay down or got up. On the following day, the firstborn said to the younger, "Look, I slept last night with my father. Let's make him drink wine tonight too. Then you go in and sleep with him, so that we may keep our family alive through our father." So they had their father drink wine that night too. And the younger got up and slept with him. And he did not know when she lay down or got up. And so both of the daughters of Lot conceived by their father. The firstborn gave birth to a son, and named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. As for the younger, she also gave birth to a son, and named him Ben-Ami. He is the father of the sons of Ammon to this day. The Bible tells us about a time when the oldest daughter went to her father, and they committed a sin together. This might make us feel uncomfortable because it's a bad thing that happened. But it's much better for young people to learn about right and wrong from the Bible, where bad actions are shown as bad, than to learn from rude words written on walls or from nasty stories. Everyone will find out about bad things at some point, but the Bible always makes it clear that God does not like sin and will punish it. It's strange, but true, that Lot, even though he was drunk, did the exact bad thing he had once talked about with the men of Sodom. He was with his daughters in a way he should not have been. They gave birth to boys, Moab and Ben-Ami, whose descendants were the Moabites and Ammonites, perennial enemies of Israel. Moab sounds like the words from father, and Ben-Ami means son of my kinsman. These etymologies perpetuated for Israel the ignominious beginning of these wicked enemies. This chapter records God's judgment on a morally bankrupt Canaanite civilization, but it also provides a severe warning against others becoming like them. It was difficult to get Lot out of Sodom, and Sodom out of Lot's family. Lot was an upright citizen, hospitable and generous, and a leader of the community. Actually, he was a judge, for he was sitting in the gateway of the city. Judges usually sat by the city gates, public places where legal and business transactions were finalized. As a judge, Lot sought to screen out the wickedness of his townfolk and to give advice on good living. He knew truth and justice, righteousness and evil. He was a righteous man. 2 Peter chapter 2 verses 7 through 9. And if he rescued righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the perverted conduct of unscrupulous people, for by what he saw and heard that righteous man, while living among them, felt his righteous soul tormented day after day by their lawless deeds. Then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from a trial, and to keep the unrighteous under punishment for the day of judgment. Yet in spite of his denunciation of their lifestyle, he liked the good life of Sodom's society. He preferred making money off its citizens to staying in the hills where there would be no filthy living, but also no good life. Just like God saved Lot, he knows exactly how to save us from our troubles and temptations. And just as surely, he has a plan to deal with those who do wrong when the time is right. We should have full faith in God's ability to rescue good people, because it's as guaranteed as his promise to judge the ungodly. We read, "The Lord knows how." Let's be assured of this. Even when we're unsure of the way, God always knows. This truth is a solid foundation for how we live and what we believe. Think about it. Sometimes we encounter confusing teachings. For example, we might try to understand how God's control over everything fits with our ability to make choices. In such situations, it's wise not to dive too deep into these complex issues. If we go too far, we might get lost in confusion. Remember, God understands it all, even when we don't. Now, consider this. There are consequences reserved for those who do wrong. They are set aside for Judgment Day. However, those who believe don't face this fate. God promises to rescue us from the day of judgment and shield us from the anger He will release upon the world. This is a promise we can hold on to, a beacon of hope that guides us through life's uncertainties. Revelation chapter 3, verse 10. Because you have kept my word of perseverance, I also will keep you from the hour of the testing, that hour which is about to come upon the whole world, to test those who live on the earth. The hour of truth came with the visitation from on high. Lot seemed godly and pure, but he was hypocritical. His words were not taken seriously. The saint at first pitched his tent near Sodom, but later Sodom controlled his life. As long as the Lord left Lot alone, he would seek to profess faith while at the same time living in Sodom. Ultimately, he could not have both. Sodom would have destroyed him if the Lord had not destroyed Sodom. This story arc contains 4 major motifs: God's swift judgment, Lot's close attachment to the wicked society, God's merciful sparing of Lot from doom, and the rebirth of Sodom in the cave. Israel could see through these that if God judges a people severely, He is righteous because of their great evil. She could also learn the folly of becoming enamored with Canaan's wickedness. So, knowing how God dealt with the Canaanites, how should one live? The lesson is simple. Do not love the world or anything in the world. For the world and its desires, lusts pass away. 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 and 17. Under the judgment of God. It is dangerous and foolish to become enamored with the current corrupt world system because it is doomed to God's swift and sudden destruction. In speaking to His disciples about a coming time of great destruction, Jesus mentioned what happened to Lot's wife and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Luke chapter 17, verses 32 through 33. Remember Lot's wife. Whoever strives to save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will keep it. If an unbeliever desires the best of this world, he will lose both this world, because it perishes, and life in the next. Luke chapter 17, verses 34 through 37. I tell you, on that night there will be 2 in one bed. One will be taken and the other will be left. There will be 2 women grinding at the same place. One will be taken and the other will be left. 2 men will be in the field. One will be taken and the other will be left. And responding, they said to him, Where, Lord? And he said to them, Where the body is, there also the vultures will be gathered. Jesus also stated that if He had performed the miracles He performed in Capernaum and Sodom, the Sodomites would have repented. Matthew chapter 11, verse 23. And thou, Capernaum, which art exalted unto heaven, shalt be brought down to hell. For if the mighty works which have been done in thee had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. This indicates that God judges based on knowledge, and that sinners will face a punishment greater than physical destruction. What does the Bible say about hospitality? Hospitality is all about making others feel welcomed and cared for. It means showing kindness and generosity to guests and even people we don't know. The idea of hospitality is like showing love to those who are not familiar to us. In the Bible, this wonderful quality is something God asks us to embrace and practice. It's mentioned many times, showing us it's an important way to live. In the Old Testament, God clearly tells us to be hospitable. Leviticus chapter 19, verses 33 through 34. When a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall not oppress or mistreat him. But the stranger who resides with you shall be to you like someone native-born among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you are strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. While Jesus was teaching and helping people, He and His followers relied completely on the kindness and support of those they visited in each town. Matthew chapter 10, verses 9 through 10. Do not take gold or silver, or even copper money in your money belt, or a provision bag for your journey, or even 2 tunics or sandals or a staff, for the worker deserves his support. Likewise, the early Christians also depended on and received hospitality from others. Acts chapter 2, verses 44 through 45. And all those who had believed in Jesus as Savior were together and had all things in common, considering their possessions to belong to the group as a whole. And they began selling their property and possessions and were sharing the proceeds with all the other believers, as anyone had need. Acts chapter 28, verse 7. In the vicinity of that place there were estates belonging to the leading man of the island, named Publius, who welcomed and entertained us hospitably for 3 days. In ancient times, travelers really counted on the kindness of people they didn't know. Traveling was risky. There weren't many places to stay, and most Christians didn't have enough money to afford them. So, they often relied on strangers opening up their homes not just to stay, but sometimes even to hold church services. Being hospitable, welcoming strangers into your home, was seen as a very important good deed, especially for those leading the Christian community. It was a sign of true leadership and caring. Titus chapter 1, verse 8. And he must be hospitable to believers as well as strangers, a lover of what is good, sensible, upright, fair, devout, self-disciplined, above reproach whether in public or in private. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 2. Now, an overseer must be blameless and beyond reproach, the husband of one wife, self-controlled, sensible, respectable, hospitable, able to teach. The author of the book of Hebrews encourages us to remember to never forget something important. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2. Do not neglect to extend hospitality to strangers, especially among the family of believers, being friendly, cordial, and gracious, sharing the comforts of your home and doing your part generously. For by this some have entertained angels without knowing it. Let's look into the story from the book of Genesis, where we learn about Abraham's kind and generous act of welcoming 3 strangers into his home. Despite being rich and old, Abraham didn't ask his servants to take care of these unexpected guests. Instead, he chose to serve them himself, offering the very best he could provide. And guess what? Those strangers were none other than the Lord and 2 of his angels. This teaches us about the value of treating everyone with kindness and generosity, just like Abraham did.
Why did Lot's daughters lie down with her own father? Here's the situation with Lot. After he managed to escape a terrible disaster, he found himself in a whole new set of troubles. Here's what went down. Lot couldn't stay in Zoar, a place he initially thought would be safe. He was terrified to live there for a few reasons. First, he might have realized that choosing Zoar was his idea, not God's. He had made his own plan instead of trusting God's guidance, which probably made him feel insecure about his safety there. Secondly, he might have noticed that the people in Zoar were just as bad as those he had left behind in Sodom, which would make any righteous person uncomfortable. He might have thought, if God didn't spare Sodom, why would Zoar be any different? Lastly, there was a practical danger. After the disaster, water levels, possibly from the Jordan River, started rising, threatening to flood the plain. This water, mixing with the leftover debris, gradually created what we now know as the Dead Sea. Lot figured that if this water was swallowing up everything else, Zoar was doomed too, despite having dodged the initial catastrophe. The key takeaway here is pretty straightforward. When we make decisions based on our own judgment without seeking God's direction, we often end up in tough spots. Choosing our paths without considering His guidance can lead us into situations that feel unstable and insecure. He found himself compelled to seek refuge in the mountains, selecting a cave as his dwelling place. It seems odd that he didn't go back to Abraham for protection, a man who had twice saved him before. However, it's true that even some good people don't always make the wisest choices for their well-being. Now he felt relieved to retreat to the mountain. The man who once struggled to find sufficient space for himself and his livestock across the entire land, competing with Abraham for territory and aiming to distance himself as much as possible, now found himself confined to a mere cave. There, he barely had space to move, living alone and in fear. Remember, God may deem it fair to limit and humble those who misuse their freedom and abundance. Furthermore, consider Lot's story as a cautionary tale. Those who abandon their spiritual community for worldly gains may ultimately suffer, ensnared by the consequences of their own choices. Genesis chapter 19, verses 31 through 32. The firstborn said to the younger, "Our father is aging, and there is not a man on earth available to be intimate with us in the customary way, so that we may have children. Come, let us make our father drunk with wine, and we will lie with him, so that we may preserve our family through our father." The firstborn was the one to hatch this plan. We read, "We will lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father." Lot might have thought he was a safe distance from Sodom, but Sodom was closer to him than ever. Sodom lied in the hearts of his own children. In a remote and lonely place, Lot and his daughters committed a serious wrongdoing. It is a sad story. The daughters concocted a sinful scheme to lead their father into transgression. Their sin was arguably more severe. They devised a plan to lift their father's spirits in his troubles and woes by intoxicating him, with the hidden agenda of engaging in outright sinful acts with him. They might have thought like Noah. They were the only survivors. Some may argue that the daughters had a seemingly justifiable reason. Their father lacked male heirs. They were without spouses, and they were uncertain of marrying into the esteemed lineage, fearing that their offspring from other men wouldn't carry on their father's legacy. They might have even pondered the hope that the Messiah would emerge from their lineage, as he was to be a descendant of Terah's lineage, akin to Abraham. With their mother and other family members no longer present, and the prohibition against marrying the detestable Canaanites, they rationalized their thoughts. Note, good intentions are often abused to patronize bad actions. Whatever their pretense was, it is certain that their project was very wicked and vile, and an impudent affront to the very light and law of nature. Let us consider the true nature of their actions. They were undeniably wicked, a blatant disrespect to the inherent moral laws. It's interesting to note that even the most severe punishments for committing sins don't deter people with corrupt hearts from continuing to do wrong. It's baffling how desires that should be eliminated can suddenly reappear, even in those who have recently witnessed catastrophic consequences for similar actions. This teaches us that without divine grace, the human heart is powerless to resist evil. It is important to understand that being alone can be just as dangerous as being with others, as it comes with its own set of temptations. This can be seen in the story of Joseph, who found himself at risk of sin when he was isolated with Potiphar's wife, as told in Genesis chapter 39, verse 11. It serves as a reminder that individuals, even family members, must be vigilant in guarding their thoughts and resisting any immoral impulse, especially when left in solitude. To keep the devil from gaining a foothold in our hearts, it's crucial that we remain on guard against sin every moment of our lives. This means we need to be watchful, not just when we're around others, but also when we're alone. We have to ask for God's help continuously to maintain our moral values and fight against the temptations of sin, no matter what situation we find ourselves in. It's a continuous battle, one that requires our attention and dedication at all times, to ensure that we don't let our guard down and allow the devil away into our hearts. Genesis chapter 19, verses 33 through 38. So they gave their father wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. And he did not know when she lay down or when she got up, because he was completely intoxicated. Then the next day, the firstborn said to the younger, Behold, I lay with my father last night. Let us make him drunk with wine tonight also, and then you go in and lie with him, so that we may preserve our family through our father. So they gave their father wine that night also, and the younger got up and lay with him. And again, he did not know when she lay down or when she got up. Thus both the daughters of Lot conceived by their father. The firstborn gave birth to a son, and named him Moab, from father. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also gave birth to a son, and named him Ben-Ami, son of my people. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day. Lot, by his own foolish actions and lack of caution, found himself in a terribly unfortunate situation. He allowed himself to be tricked by his own children, resulting in him getting drunk on 2 consecutive nights and committing this great sin, as noted in Genesis chapter 19, verse 33. This prompts us to ask, what is the nature of humanity? Even the best among us can falter and make grave mistakes when they are not guided and supported by God. Listen closely and understand the danger of feeling too secure. Consider the story of Lot, a man who managed to live a righteous life in the corrupt city of Sodom. He avoided indulging in the vices of the city and deeply mourned its wickedness, standing strong against it. However, even Lot, when he retreated to a mountain, a place where he thought he'd be safe from temptation, found himself tragically succumbing to it. This teaches us a crucial lesson. Even if you believe you are standing tall, unshakable, and steadfast, you must always be cautious and vigilant. Remember, no place on earth, except for the sacred realms above, can fully shield us from the harmful temptations that lurk around, including those set by Satan himself. Now, let's talk about the danger of drunkenness. Understand that drunkenness isn't just a sin on its own. It's a gateway to numerous other sins, some of which can be exceptionally vile and damaging, potentially leaving lasting scars and dishonor. Remember, avoiding drunkenness isn't just about preventing a single sin. It's about protecting yourself from a cascade of wrongdoings that could follow. Always be mindful of the choices you make and the consequences they carry, especially when it comes to substances that could impair your judgment and lead you astray. The peril of being tempted by our closest family members and friends, those we cherish, respect, and anticipate kindness from, is very real. Consider Lot, a man known for his self-control and moral integrity, who, despite being resilient against external pressures, was deceived into wrongdoing by the very daughters he trusted. This teaches us that we must be cautious at all times and aware of the potential for betrayal, even in our most trusted circles. It's crucial to understand that temptation can come from the most unexpected places, and we should always be prepared to resist it. However, it's important to remember that even within the lineage of Judah, from which our Savior comes, they are instances of such births. Moreover, Ruth, who was from Moab, is also included in his family tree. This history does not justify the wrong, but shows that redemption and purpose can emerge from even troubled beginnings. Matthew chapter 1 verses 3 through 5. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez was the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahashon, and Nahashon the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse. Observe that after this, we don't hear anything more about Lot or what happened to him. It's very likely that he felt sorry for his mistakes, asked for forgiveness, and received it. However, the fact that the Bible doesn't mention him anymore teaches us an important lesson about the effects of drinking too much. When people drink, they often forget what they should remember. But there's more. Society tends to forget them too. Many individuals who could have been remembered with admiration and respect are instead forgotten or remembered with disdain because of their drinking habits. This should be a warning to all of us about the dangers of alcohol and how it can not only harm our lives, but also affect how we are remembered. This might be an uncomfortable story to hear, and you might wonder, why is this in the Bible? But it's much better for young people to learn about right and wrong from the Bible, where bad actions are shown as bad, than to learn from rude words written on walls or from nasty stories. Everyone will find out about bad things at some point, but the Bible always makes it clear that God does not like sin and will punish it. It's strange but true that Lot, even though he was drunk, did the exact bad thing he had once talked about with the men of Sodom. He was with his daughters in a way he should not have been. They gave birth to boys, Moab and Ben-Ammi, whose descendants were the Moabites and Ammonites, perennial enemies of Israel. Moab sounds like the words from father, and Ben-Ammi means son of my kinsman. These etymologies perpetuated for Israel the ignominious beginning of these wicked enemies. The Ammonites? We find references to the Ammonite people throughout the early history of Israel. In the early chapters of Israel's story, we often come across the Ammonite people. These Ammonites shared a Semitic lineage with the Israelites. Yet despite this blood connection, they were more frequently foes than allies. During Moses' era, the lush lands along the Jordan River Valley were home to not just the Ammonites, but also the Amorites and Moabites. After Israel's exodus from Egypt, the Ammonites chose not to aid them. For this refusal to help, God rebuked the Ammonites. Yet when the Israelites were on the cusp of entering their promised land, God had clear directives. Do not provoke the Ammonites or engage in battle with them. I've not given you their land to possess, for I have allotted it to the descendants of Lot. Deuteronomy chapter 2 verse 19. The territories adjacent to the Ammonites fell under the domains of the Israelite tribes, Gad, Reuben, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, which were originally Amorite lands. Now the Ammonites adhered to paganism, venerating deities like Milcom and Molech. God explicitly instructed the Israelites to avoid marrying these pagans, to prevent them from falling into the snare of idol worship. Yet King Solomon, didn't heed this warning and took Naamah, an Ammonite, as his wife. This sin even affected Solomon down the line. Consequently, just as God had cautioned, Solomon was lured into the practice of idolatry. The deity Molech was particularly barbaric. Depicted as a fire god with a calf's face, his outstretched arms ready to receive infant sacrifices. The Ammonites, reflecting the savagery of their deity, exhibited extreme cruelty. For instance, when Nahash the Ammonite was negotiating a treaty, he demanded the mutilation of each Israelite man by removing their right eye. Furthermore, Amos chapter 1 verse 13 condemns the Ammonites for their vicious acts, like attacking women with children in the lands they aimed to dominate. Under the rule of King Saul, the nation of Israel emerged victorious against the Ammonites, bringing them under Israelite control as subjects. Following in Saul's footsteps, King David maintained dominance over the Ammonites, and he even went as far as laying siege to their capital city to ensure Israel's firm grip on power. However, after Israel and Judah went their separate ways, the Ammonites started to forge alliances with those who stood against Israel, signaling a shift in their loyalties and strategies. As we move forward in time to the 7th century BC, we see the Ammonites reclaiming some measure of independence, but this resurgence was short-lived. About a century later, Nebuchadnezzar, a powerful ruler, conquered them, reshaping their destiny. During the time when Persia ruled the region, a man named Tobiah, who hailed from Ammon, is mentioned in the scriptures as possibly overseeing the area. Yet the community he governed was diverse, composed not only of Ammonites, but also of Arabs and various other groups. By the time we reach the era described in the New Testament, Jews had established themselves in the region previously known as Ammon, now called Perea. This integration marked significant changes in the demographic and cultural landscape. The Ammonites, as a distinct people, last appeared in historical records in the 2nd century, mentioned by Justin Martyr, who observed their considerable numbers. However, during the Roman era, a notable transformation occurred. The Ammonites gradually merged with the Arab population, effectively blending into the broader tapestry of the region's societies. They also gave birth to the Moabites. The Moabites were a tribe descended from Moab, the son of Lot, born of an unacceptable relationship with his oldest daughter. Their beginnings were in Zoar, a land nestled by the southeastern shores of the Dead Sea, wherefrom they spread their reach eastward beyond the Jordan River. As time marched on, the landscape of their world shifted. The Amorites, as when the Israelites embarked on their legendary exodus, they skirted Moab, traversing the rugged wilderness to the east, moving toward lands north of the Arnon. But the Moabites, stricken with fear at this migration, and their king Balak, felt a deep unease. In their distress, they turned for help to the Midianites, kindling an alliance against the tide of change. Let's focus on a truly remarkable figure from the Bible who originated from Moab, and her name is Ruth. She was born among the Moabites, yet she shares a connection with Israel through her ancestor Lot, Abraham's nephew, as stated in Genesis chapter 11 verse 31. Ruth stands as a powerful testament to how the Almighty can transform someone's life, guiding it along a path He has sovereignly chosen. We witness the unfolding of God's flawless design in Ruth's journey, a manifestation of His divine intervention that he extends to all his beloved children. Despite her roots being entrenched in the pagan traditions of Moab, Ruth's encounter with the God of Israel was transformative. By embracing faith, she became a beacon of God's love and power, showcasing her devotion to Him. Remarkably, Ruth, the woman from Moab, is acknowledged as one of the eminent women listed in the lineage of Jesus Christ, as noted in Matthew chapter 1, verse 5. This inclusion underscores her significance and the profound impact of her faith journey, demonstrating how God's grace can elevate anyone, regardless of their past, to play a pivotal role in His grand narrative.